Hello, welcome to Game Over Gerkinman. I'm Gerkinman, and this is, once again, Kameo. I'm just going to move my chair, sorry for that. Part 4, and we are back in the Mushroom Cave here. So we just picked up Rubble, so here he is, we just got him last episode. And I guess this is a little tutorial, I suppose. It isn't as obvious about it as a lot of the stuff earlier in the game is. By having these mosquito nests on the walls, which, mind you, mosquitoes don't come out of nests, just so you know. Actually, Metro Prime did this too. I guess they were more like wasps. But in order to teach you to use these advanced abilities, instead of having a character say, oh, you need to use this technique to do this, it kind of just gives you this scenario where you need to destroy these in order to get a prize, which in this case is a fruit which will upgrade your abilities. And holy shit, is it noisy outside with all the cleaning going on after that snowstorm. So this is a bit more of an organic way of teaching people your new abilities. It's just by putting them in a scenario where they have to use them to achieve something, instead of being obvious and just saying, hey, use this fucking dumb thing, you idiot, which is what the game had been doing up until this point. So I do find it kind of interesting that the game fluctuates between more subtle tutorial work like this, which is what really it should all be, and the more complicated and the more obvious stuff, which is how the opening is front-loaded. So it definitely seems a little alien to me, the way they've approached it in that respect, or a little very uneven. This is probably how I should word it. Although killing all those mosquitoes does take some time. So as I said, this is Rubble, so obviously, as you can tell, he's just a pile of rocks rolling about. I find it to be a lot of fun to use. He's personally one of my favorite characters in the game by far, followed by Ash. I don't remember how the others play. I'll remember as I go through it, but Rubble is a very useful character, although offensively he's not all that great. He's good at like stunning enemies, but his rock attacks don't generally kill enemies. They'll just stun them or make them confused or whatever. But he's just a lot of fun to play around with. And so here we work out how to use the upgrade system. So here you go. This is where I was talking earlier about having a character wheel that you could pause at any time through the game, rather than having to go into menus and select things. Having a radial character menu, I think would have been a much more efficient way of doing these character management, basically, because you could see that I think was it 6 or 8 characters, and then you have to go into these individual upgrade menus and things like that to upgrade things, read about them. It just could have been streamlined a lot further than it was, which is unfortunate because this feels really, really clunky. But we just got an upgrade here, which I already forgot which one I picked because I wasn't looking at the screen. Oh, rapid charge, so it just means I can charge my explosive attack quicker. Which, Rubble's Spirit Bar, you don't really need to increase that much. None of his attacks really take up a lot of spirit, which is, I guess I haven't really gone into spirit yet. You can see me like swapping them around. I'm trying to exit out of the menu and all it's doing is changing where the character's located on the face buttons. The spirit, if you played A Link Between Worlds, the most recent new Zelda game on the 3DS, and the arrows and everything are tied to a meter which refills. It's basically what the spirit meter is, except it doesn't refill itself. There's a little puzzle which I didn't manage to work out until after I was finished recording. But I came to later. And there's his little explosive attack, which is kind of cool, actually. But I could not work out how to open up these crates because I'm dumb. The spirit meter, unlike in Zelda, doesn't refill itself. But if you just change character and change back again, you'll find that it's actually suddenly completely full again. So that's kind of it's kind of hilarious how redundant it is in that respect. So they might as well have not even had it. It's really just to stop you exploiting things like playing as Pummleweed from just like going through an entire level underground and hiding and not confronting anyone. But the game kind of prevents that already because, as you'll see in this episode, a lot of areas they have the very similar to most action games where the fence will come up and it won't come down until you've killed all the enemies in that little room. Very, very, very common technique used in a lot of action games. And they implement that here, which makes that the idea of people exploiting the system and hiding underground for the whole level kind of, once again, redundant or pointless, or it wouldn't make sense. But, so here we go. Here's a little puzzle here that took me a whole half a second to work out. Once again, you unlock a new character, so the first thing the game wants you to do is to try to teach you how to use its abilities. So just flood it down here as Kameo and pull out the rock guide. There is some, I did have an edit coming up here in a second. I spent a while trying to get a particular plant, which is over there, to explode a gateway, and I just could not get it to do it. So I wasted like 2 minutes there. So instead, what I ended up doing was working out that, oh, it's these trees with the eyes. And of course, instinctively I just launched one rock at each of their eyes, thinking that I just had to do it 4 times. But that isn't what it wants me to do. It wants me to use my explosive attack, which I worked out kind of after a little bit of trial and error, which is the best way to have like this sort of game. I think in terms of teaching people to play properly, that is definitely the best way of getting them to learn things. It's through a little bit of trial and error and not through spelling things out for them. But we're entering another part of the Forgotten Forest, or was it Forgotten Woods? It's Forgotten something. And this is where the weakness in the game design really comes into play. So this whole sequence here, normally, like if this was a regular Zelda game, this would be the temple where you'd have to solve a bunch of puzzles in order to get to the boss and finish the temple. And this game does indeed have temples. In fact, the next episode is a temple, and you'll see the massive difference in design quality between the temples in Zelda and the temples in this. But this is very much like it's a very linear path where you basically solve a little tiny puzzle, the same puzzle several times, and the rest of it's all focused around combat, which is and isn't a great thing. The combat could be better than it is in this, and that would have improved it a little bit, but oh, this is also where it introduces the shielded enemies, which took me a second to work out how to get around them. So I guess in this regard, there is a little bit of a sense of puzzle to the to some of the enemies, which is nice. And I like the way these rocks roll around behind him. That's great. So of course, what you're supposed to do is use the high shot of your rock and flip it over his back, and then have it roll up behind him and stun him. I managed to achieve this with the explosive one, but it's actually just easier just to walk up in front of him and then just throw a rock over his back. And there goes another plow. Don't you just love that sound? I know I do. Nothing like hearing that at 6:30 in the morning on a Sunday. Lovely. So yeah, the puzzles basically in this area all consist of standing on one of those pads with rubble and throwing a rock into one of those statues' mouths, which is of course what you have to do back at that other room where there was the fruit that I was trying to get to. And once I worked it out here, I went back and got that. That creeper singing for reasons. And of course we have more of these plants. I do like the way you can control the bomb like that. It actually, you'd think you'd control it directly, but it actually moves around on its own accord a little bit for no apparent reason. It's never explained why it kind of moves around in an odd way in that respect. And of course these guys are a repeat of the enemies from that opening stage where you have the guys under the metal shells. Only now they're under plant shells because we're in a forest, I suppose. So that's recycling, but at least they took the time to recolor the assets, I guess. I kind of would have preferred a different enemy type, but you know, whatever, I suppose. It could have been worse. They're certainly very annoying, not because they're hard to beat, but because they take up time. They waste your time, and I hate having my time wasted in games. It's like my biggest peeve. It's when games waste my time doing stupid things. But since this is a longer episode, I thought I'd talk about Rare. I said I was going to talk about him a couple of episodes ago, but the episodes were too short to really get in depth. And really, this whole sequence is just repeating what I've just done like several times. So I thought I'd talk about my thoughts on Rare and where they've come from and where they are now. I'm not going to get into like their whole history. You know, like they started as Ultimate Play the Game back in the 70s and all that sort of thing. But like many other people, my first exposure to Rare's games was with Donkey Kong Country, or that trilogy of games. But it wasn't until the Nintendo 64, I think, for a lot of people that Rare really became a household name. My cousin Bradley had GoldenEye, and whenever I went to his place, we would play the hell out of the multiplayer of that, even though I sucked at it. I rented Donkey Kong 60, Banjo-Kazooie all the time when I was younger, although when I had the opportunity to buy it, I bought Yoshi's Story instead, which is a fun game, but probably should have got Banjo-Kazooie. I did own Donkey Kong 64. It was the only Rare game I actually owned on the Nintendo 64 at the time when I had one, at least. Although I own a few more now. I have like Jet Force Gemini and a few other things. Borrowed Jet Force Gemini for a friend. I liked it, but I didn't like it. That game has a lot of issues. A lot of the games had issues. GoldenEye, I think, holds up pretty badly just because of the limitations of the control. I like it mechanically, but from an actual gameplay perspective, it hasn't held up all that well. Perfect Dark holds up a little bit better. You get the HD version on the Xbox 360. On Xbox Live Arcade is actually a lot of fun. It still holds up quite well. But Banjo-Kazooie is a game that a lot of people look back on very, very fondly. I like it, but I never loved it. And I definitely didn't love the sequel. I felt the sequel was a little bit too big and too open and too empty. But I do appreciate the smaller scope of the original Banjo-Kazooie. And while as platformers are not exactly to my... a little bit too much collecting and stuff, I do appreciate the games, and I do love the art direction in them. I'm just trying to think what else was there on the Nintendo 64 when they're in the headache. Diddy Kong Racing, I spent a lot of time out. Jess has a copy here, very, very occasionally play it. It's a good time. But a lot of people they think when Microsoft bought Rare, that was like the end of them. But I get the feeling that Rare started on its downward spiral before then. I think Star Fox Adventures was really the first Rare game I played and was just like, I don't enjoy this. Like, I would consider both Star Fox Adventures and Kameo here are both Zelda clones, basically. And I definitely think Kameo is a much, much better game and a much, much more entertaining game than Star Fox Adventures, definitely. Conker's Bad Fur Day is an interesting game. It doesn't actually play all that well, I find, going back to it now. The platforming is not great. It's really, there's a lot more emphasis on the writing and the presentation than there is on the actual gameplay. Xbox Live and Reloaded, obviously, I've played on this channel previously. And while it looks beautiful, it doesn't play all that well anymore, that's for sure. Oh, really? There's banging outside now? Man, we've got everything. Wow. Good times. Yeah, so Conquer, like, I'm a fan of the game, but I don't think the game is that great, if that makes sense. But I actually think that they actually had quite a few good games on the Xbox 360. Both Viva Pinata games are absolutely fantastic, and I love them both very, very much. As I said, Kameo is not a bad game per se. Like, by the time you get up to this point in the game, a lot of the issues that I had earlier on had gone away. Whether or not they come back remains to be seen, but by this point, your head's kind of wrapped around how the game works, and it's not so bad. But yeah, I really enjoyed both Viva Pinata games. Interestingly enough, too, I couldn't remember who composed this, and it turns out it was a guy called Steve Burke, and he also composed on Star Fox Adventures, and after this, he worked with Grant Kirkhope on Viva Pinata. So he doesn't have a massive list of games that he's worked on, but he has worked on some big stuff. But rare as they are now, Microsoft did eventually start to kill the studio. I think after Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts kind of failed. And that's a game I haven't played, so I can't comment on it. I know a lot of people hate it, but I think from a lot of people I've spoken to actually really enjoy the game. They shouldn't have had Banjo-Kazooie on the game. From a mechanical standpoint, a lot of people actually think it's actually very cool. And one day I'm hoping to actually, grab a copy and play it and be able to make a decision for myself. But that was like the last big game they really worked on before Microsoft turned them into the Avatar and Kinect Sports studio and turned them into the shell of the studio that they are now. Which is kind of unfortunate, but I can also understand why, because the games that they were making just weren't selling. And I don't know that it was Microsoft who had control over that, or if they left Rare to their own devices and just assumed because they were Rare that they do great work. maybe it was a combination of both. It's really hard to say or to know. And I don't know that anyone from Rare will ever actually come out and say, hey, this is what's happening. But I do know that Phil Spencer is a big fan of Rare, and since he's running the Xbox division, he's been very adamant that he's going to try to bring Rare back to their former glory from the Nintendo 64 era. And, you know, if he can do that, then that would be fantastic, and I know I'd love to see that. I think the biggest issue with Microsoft with Rare was that they weren't taking advantage of the incredible number of franchises which Rare owns the rights to. I mean, on the Xbox 360 you had... Well, actually, yeah, aside from Banjo, you didn't really have any in Perfect Dark Zero, which Perfect Dark Zero was not a good game. And that was not Microsoft's fault. That was all Rare. They were just out of touch with the shooter genre by that point. But, you know, there's all these great franchises which Rare have access to. I know Conker's coming back in Project Spark as an episodic game series, which is an interesting move, and I don't necessarily think it's a bad one. I think the idea of an episodic Conker series is actually much better than a one long game project, to be completely honest. But then again, it's also not being developed internally by Rare, so that could go either way. But then you also end up with things like Battletoads is coming back, I'm pretty sure. Phil Spencer was wearing a Battletoads t-shirt at the Windows 10 press conference. Battletoads were just announced to be in Shovel Knight. I am pretty sure that Battletoads are coming back, and I think if, especially in this age where games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne are popular, so gamers enjoy a challenge, I think it's probably the best time there's ever been to actually bring Battletoads back as a franchise. And I'm hoping that'll be the beginning, because there's a really, really large number. Wizardry is another one that would be great if it came back. I know a lot of my viewers here are too young to have remembered playing the original Wizardry, but it's well worth checking out if you're into RPGs. It'd be really interesting to see Rare go back to some of their really, really old franchises. I know they tried to bring back Sabrewulf, and that didn't quite work out a few years ago, but the legacy of content they have is just insane. Or even a new Kameo game would be fantastic. I don't think they'd do it because I don't know that the sales in this game were amazing. I don't think they would have been bad, because I mean, it was a launch game. There wasn't that much to choose from, but I still don't think it was quite what Microsoft were hoping for. But a new Viva Pinata would be great too. I mean, they really, even though most of the talents moved on to other things, I mean, the original GoldenEye team, they moved on and they developed Free Radical Games, I believe it was, and then they developed the Time Splitters franchise. And of course, that got bought out and they became the Crysis team. So, I mean, a lot of the original devs from Rare have gone and moved on to other things, but that legacy of franchises is still there, and it's still something that really should be taken advantage of by Microsoft, and I think Phil Spencer is actually going to try to do that, which is, I think, great news for gamers in general. And it's definitely a great move for Microsoft, since the Xbox One, like I have one, it's a fine system. The differences between it and the PS4 are negligible at best. And really, there's no difference between the PS4 and the Xbox One, and it really comes down to what exclusives are available. And if you've got Rare and you've got all these franchises, then realistically, Microsoft should be kicking Sony's ass and taking full advantage of the franchises they own through this deal. And also, competition this year, like God of War 3 is getting remastered. That's it. You know, take Battletoads over a re-release of the third game in the series any day. I guess we'll just have to see how smart they play it. And the other question is, how many of Rare's original talent are still there in order to make these games great in the first place? But then again, there's also the fact that there's a lot of young developers now who grew up playing these games, and if they're the ones who end up getting put in charge of them, just through pure passion and been able to work on these projects, they might be able to bring back that original feel. So who really knows? I guess we'll find out in the next couple of years. But I do think the days of Kinect Sports and things like that are over, finally. I can't wait to see what comes out of the studio next, just out of morbid curiosity. So I really would like to see them return to their glory days, because, I mean, really, in terms of big publishers left in, I mean, big developers left in England, there's really only Rare. Lionhead is still there. Lionhead's games in recent years haven't been so great. And I think Codemasters are still there, making their racing games, and that's about it. So it'd be nice to see all that development head back over there. Alright, so this sequence is still going. Like I said, I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. I think once I got to this point, I just wanted to start like skipping the enemies, because you don't actually get anything for killing the enemies. I mean, you get points, but I don't know what the points actually do anything. I don't think they do. I think they're just there for arbitrary reasons, like games got to have a score system because games. But it really drags these sequences out. I can understand them like wanting to make the game a bit longer if this was a lot shorter. Because I mean, like these parts in between temples are actually the lengthiest parts of the game so far, by quite a large margin. So I can understand them wanting to get the most out of them. But it's just you're just killing the same guys over and over and over again. Maybe it'll get better in later areas when I've got more of a variety of characters to choose from and the environments are a little bit more varied. I guess we'll find out as we play through. That's only two. It's worth noting that the next few episodes of this, or the episode after this, will be pre-recorded, but then I'm going back to using the live recording format, and it's because it was taking a lot of time recording the gameplay footage and then recording over the top of the audio over the top of it. I'm like basically double doing things, and that's time that could be spent animating and doing other things of that nature. So that's why I've made that decision. So this will be the second last pre-recorded episode, and the only time I'll do pre-recorded ones is if there's an audio issue. But as you can see, pre-recording comes with its own set of issues, since I can't really do anything about the noise of that truck outside. This series has just gotten so good. Came over Gerkinman, the noisy edition. It's a good time. Oh my god, just so many enemies here. And the other thing is, like, it's not particularly challenging. It's just kind of gets to the point where it's just like, it feels like stalling almost. Although this bit here was a little more challenging, trying to juggle all these characters, trying to launch things, and can be a little bit tricky. It requires a little bit of finesse. These shielded enemies are great though. I can't remember if there are other. I'm assuming that there'll be other enemies later on with abilities that make other playable characters more important. I guess I'll find out as I go. I know there's a dragon character, and I don't remember if that dragon will, if his fire breath actually burns the shields. It'd be pretty cool if it did. Like I said, I don't remember archers being completely annoying here. Which of course, archers are pretty hard to hit since I don't have a proper ranged character. I do like the amount of foliage. Foliage? Oh, that's Simpsons reference. That they managed to pack into this game. Even though it's not a beautiful game, they do at least make the game world compact. It's not. It doesn't look big and empty. There are smaller areas, but there's things happening in them. There's plants everywhere. There's little particles everywhere. It's atmospheric. So even though it's not on a technical level super impressive, I do appreciate the amount of artistry that's actually gone into the design of the world and the environments. I think it's quite, even if it's not visually amazing, it still looks good, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. It might make sense. But thankfully, this is the last guy, I think. Yes, it is. Absolutely lovely. And there's pumpkins everywhere, like it's Halloween for some reason. Even though it ain't. I thought this was a nice touch too. There's this one troll who's like hanging by his leg because he didn't manage to come down properly. It's a fun little touch there. I probably didn't have to kill him, but I did anyway because that's the way I roll. No idea why he's there. Just hit his corpse, make sure he's dead. He's proper dead. Ragdolling all over the place. And that's that. Thanks for joining me. Hope you had a great time. Join me next time. I'm going to enter this here forest temple, and I hope you have a good one. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you later.